Hey everybody, I'm here today with my friend Megan McElligott. She is a marine biologist at the University of Hawaii, and she's here today to talk to us, tell us a little bit about marine biology, what it is, and what it takes to be a marine biologist for those of you who want to join into that field someday. Thank you so much for being with us today, Megan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I was just hoping you could start. Can you tell us just what is marine biology?
Sure. So, marine biology is a very vast branch of science. It's basically studying any living organism that's in the ocean, the marine environment. So, that could range from viruses and bacteria all the way through blue whales and everything in between, plants as well.
Mhm. Awesome. And then so specifically, yeah, the ocean is a crazy large place. So like, what specifically do you study within that big, enormous field?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in marine mammals, and so that includes whales, seals, sea otters, um, polar bears, uh, sea lions, and your dugongs and manatees. So basically, anything that's warm blooded that is living in the ocean. And so, specifically now, I study Hawaiian spinner dolphins, which are a small dolphin species that we find around the Hawaiian Islands.
Awesome. And then so what about the dolphins do you study? Do you study like their habitats or their behaviors or?
Yeah, so I study their habitat use patterns.
Mhm.
Spinner dolphins are an interesting species because they have these daily behavioral cycles where they are nocturnal. So at night, they'll go to the deeper waters that are a bit more offshore
Mhm.
and feed on their prey. And then during the day, they actually come close to shore to get their rest. And they do this in small, protected resting bays that are shallow and clear, and they'll do the stereotypical swimming behavior. And that's sort of around midday that they do that. And to figure out which of these bays they use the most, I use passive acoustic monitoring. And that just means that we take underwater microphones that are called hydrophones, and we will deploy them on the bottom of the bay for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And I look at those recordings and see if there are any dolphin noises, if they've made any clicks or whistles. And if I see those in a recording, that tells me that there was a dolphin there at that time. And if you take those patterns and
Mhm.
look at them over the range of months and years, you can learn a lot about where the dolphins are hanging out, what bays are most important for them to get their resting behavior, and maybe areas that they don't use so much.
I mean, is there cool? Is there like a reason you do? Is it just kind of for general knowledge and to learn about dolphins, or do you have kind of like an ecological kind of agenda? Maybe is the
Sure,
right word.
so it's always helpful to know the areas that an animal uses, because then you can determine if you can protect those areas and thus protect those animals.
Hmm.
With spinner dolphins specifically, since they come in daily, fairly regularly, there's a big tourism industry to swim with dolphins or do whale watching and um, watch them from the boat. And that in itself isn't an issue, but when you have multiple boats giving multiple tours every single day, there's some concern about the cumulative impacts that that kind of disturbance might have on the dolphins' rest. If they're
Hmm.
constantly being interrupted from that resting behavior, they might not be able to forage as successfully when they try to do that at night. And so by using this monitoring to determine which of those bays are important, we can narrow down and figure out what kind of protections might work best. If the dolphins are using a specific bay every day, then we can say we might want to close off this area of the bay to human disturbance for these hours and make sure that they at least have that time to rest. And then on the other hand, if you find an area that doesn't have a lot of dolphins in it, then you know that, okay, we don't have to close that off. That can remain available for people to have their water activities.
Awesome, cool. And then have you found out anything interesting about that? Are there any like cool
so
things?
It's I don't have too many conclusions yet. That's one thing about passive acoustics is you have at least for my project, I have 6 months of having the instrument out, collecting data, and then I have to manually look at each recording, so it takes time. But one thing that I found when I was doing similar work for my master's, we were looking at the area between Maui and Lanai. That's sort of a shallower area of water, a shallower channel between those islands. And the dolphins were not using specific bays the same way we might see on the other islands. They were moving more within that shallow channel, almost as if the entire channel was a bay. So that was something where, where before we knew that there were spinner dolphins there, but we didn't know how they were using that space. And so in that instance, you can't close off the entire channel to boat traffic. So it's good to know that, they would need some other form of protection in that case.
Cool. I'm trying to think of which follow-up question I want to ask here. So like, what does that look like on kind of a day-to-day basis? So like, are you out on boats? Are you like doing computer simulations? Are you Googling stuff? Like, what does that look like?
I'm mostly behind the computer. I'll go on a boat when I need to refurbish the instruments. So we'll have divers deploy the instrument. We just have a big concrete block that we place on the bottom of the bay and then strap the instrument down. So the divers will go bring it back up, and I'll change the batteries out and reprogram the hydrophone and put it back out. So that will be a few days out of the year that I get to do that.
The good days.
The good days. We also will sometimes do a couple weeks of vessel surveys, where it's a nice way to sort of ground truth the acoustic data, so that you can have a visual confirmation of, we saw spinner dolphins, we know it was that species in this location, and then you can see if it picked up on the recorder as well. But then most days I'm at my computer looking at a spectrogram of the recordings, which is basically a way to visualize the sound. It's the time on the x-axis and the frequency on the y-axis. And so you can look through the recording and see contours or fine lines that I've learned how to recognize as
so you actually have to go
signals.
You have to go through the sound data and find the dolphin sounds, like by hand?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's time consuming.
It is. So there's a lot of days behind the computer, but podcasts help. Also, the machine learning has been a big thing in the acoustics world. It's tricky because you have to obviously have data to teach the algorithm, like this is what the sound that I'm looking for looks like. And then of course it's nature, so there's a lot of variability if there's other sounds. So that's certainly an avenue that I am pursuing but within the timeline of my degree. it's going to be mostly the manual.
Okay, yeah, you gotta do it by hand, whatever it takes, right? Yeah. For science.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so what does it take to get to where you are? Can you tell us a little bit about your educational journey? Like, oh, guys, by the way, if you're a Fremont student, Megan went to Washington High, so she's one of your rivals.
I went to Mission.
Not Washington. You went to Mission. There is no. I teach at Washington High. You went to Mission.
Yeah.
I know where.
Yeah.
I work and go to school every day. Okay, cool. Anyways, I totally messed that up. She went to Mission.
Yeah. I was a Mission kid, and then went to UC Santa Cruz, and go Slugs. So that was, I was looking between UC Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, because they all have great marine biology programs. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I also knew that mammals were my specific interest. Like, I really enjoyed learning about seals and cetaceans as well, whales. And when looking at the specific programs, Santa Cruz had the Long Marine Lab, which had a couple labs that were studying seals, sea lions, and dolphins, and also some other labs that had field work, specifically access to the elephant seal colony at Año Nuevo. And so my main focus was having those opportunities to volunteer in a lab, because at that time I was also fairly certain that I wanted to do the PhD after,
right.
Which is, yeah. So I kind of had that path in mind already, which was very helpful, but just that's sort of my biggest piece of advice, is to look at the specific program, look at specific professors, see if anyone's studying something that you think is really interesting and cool, and try it out. So I ended up volunteering at the Long Marine Lab, and they worked with seals and sea lions. And one of the main things that they did was hearing in those animals. And so before that, I didn't really know much about the world of acoustics, and that's what introduced it to me. And from there, I found, this is really interesting. I'd like to pursue this in some way. And so when I was looking for graduate schools, I looked at programs that were similar in that. So Hawaii had a professor, Mark Lammers, who I work with, who was studying passive acoustics in dolphins and also doing some humpback work. So when I was applying, it was really that. It was always very program based, yeah. Or at least if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, you can, something that sparks your interest if you want to go into some realm of biology, yeah.
Right. So take that proactive approach.
I ended up getting my master's at UC. Yes, yeah, and definitely volunteer, find a lab and volunteer, because that hands-on experience and just that exposure to grad students and seeing what that's like is huge. Not just for the applying to grad schools later, but figuring out what it is that you want to do, because it's pretty all-consuming this work. So it tends to be
you're gonna do it all
most
day,
people do it as yeah. So it should be something that you're really passionate about. And so yeah, finding that thing is definitely worth it, and also just you can try something and find out that's not really for me, and then explore something, some other topic. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I got two hopefully easy questions to finish off. So the first one, we'll start with the negatives first. What are there things that you find challenging about your job, or kind of a struggle?
Yeah, so I'd say the sort of what I mentioned before, that the work-life balance can be difficult. Part of it's because you're sort of always thinking about your project. So it can be difficult to kind of turn that off and have a break. But it's also something that I'm genuinely curious about. So it's, it's not the worst. And then I would say more like logistically would be funding, especially as a grad student. A fair amount of time is spent applying for scholarships and grants. For me, like the instruments that I use are quite expensive, batteries are expensive. So it's definitely a skill that you need to develop. But yeah, it can be a little stressful sometimes, but sometimes people can get a large grant and then, be set for a couple years. So it's not impossible, but it can be,
That's something tricky. Every grad student I've talked to so far has said. Money. It's hard to find that money. Yeah. Struggle is real.
Yeah. Yes.
Then,
exactly.
Okay, then on a little bit more positive note, what do you like? Like, are there things you really like about marine biology, or what you do, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So like I said, I was always interested in this, and I basically get to be like professionally curious about things and then go and figure out what the answer is. And it's about my favorite topic. Yeah. So it's a pretty incredible thing to wonder, like, whoa, what's going on with this animal? Like, why are they making that weird sound only at this time of year? And then you can design a project of like, how can we figure this out? What kind of tools can we use? And then analyzing the data and seeing if there's patterns in that. And then you can take what you found out and like apply it to, just teaching others about what amazing animals we have in this world, but also in terms of management, like making sure that the protections we choose to employ on these species are actually effective. So, you can test whether closing a bay allows spinner dolphins to rest successfully, or maybe it doesn't. And so we should try something else. And having that like real impact is very rewarding, I'd say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Watchers, if you have any questions, feel free to drop into the comments, shoot them to me personally, and I'll forward them on to the future Dr. McElligott. Thank you so much. Have a great day.